Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of Trucking and Safety Matters, a webinar series sponsored by Reliance Partners. I'm your host, Tom Albrecht, the Chief Revenue Officer of Reliance Partners. Today's episode is focused on ways to improve your CSA scores. And while there are 7 basic categories, we're going to focus on 3 of those categories in today's session. But before we get into that, I want to introduce our experts that are going to be guiding the conversation along. We've got Mark Barler and Daniel Vega, each of Reliance Partners. And gentlemen, let me just throw it to you. Why don't you each take a minute and tell us a little bit about your career, including what you do at Reliance.
Well, I'll start us off. My name is Mark Barler. I'm a former uh, DOT officer with the Wisconsin State Patrol. I did it for 22 and a half years, working out of the southeast region of the state on the I-94 north-south corridor in between Milwaukee and Chicago. It's an 8-lane interstate that saw between 10 and 20,000 trucks a day passing through that corridor. I did about 10,000 inspections during my career. I was an instructor for FMCSA for the Part A program, for uh, the cargo tank inspection program, and hazardous material inspection program. I was an ELD expert. I came in when the ELD regulations came in back in 2015. I created training programs here in Wisconsin that FMCSA adopted into their Part A program on how to find falsifications in ELDs and make sure that an ELD is operating properly. And we did that back in 2019. The last 6 months of my career, I answered data queues for the state of Wisconsin. So there's not very little that I haven't done when it comes to roadside inspections and whatnot.
And Mark, when did you join Reliance?
Back in 2000,
I
October of
think I was going to
2020,
say you just had your
2020.
4-year anniversary. So that's exactly right. Well, Daniel, tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
My name is Daniel Vega, former state trooper in Arizona. Did about roughly 9 years before I moved to the insurance industry. I was stationed in Yuma, Arizona, covered the interstate all the way to Gila Bend near Phoenix, Interstate 10 to Phoenix as well, I-95. So we had probably like 500 miles that I covered, my squad did. So um, took the Part A and Part B that Mark was talking about, passed those, to do inspections, did hazmat as well, and motor coaches. Once I left that, I went to Nationwide Insurance. So I worked with the companies we insured to help them with their safety programs and how to improve their scores. And same thing I'm doing now at Reliance with a little extra, submitting some data queues, giving some training and stuff like that. But generally worked at Texas, Arizona, and California states.
That's fantastic. And both of these guys have been fantastic additions to the Reliance Partners team. And there's so many ways that they help motor carriers every day. Well, so today's webinar is going to focus on unsafe driving and crashes. We're going to look at common violations and ways to reduce the scores or improve your scores, whatever word you prefer there. Mark's going to lead us initially in that. Daniel's going to take on part 2, which is going to be a discussion of how he uses data queues to try to drive improvement, amongst other ways. And then we're going to flip it back to Mark for a discussion around vehicle maintenance. I also want to let the audience know that you can ask questions at the bottom of your webinar screen in the chat box or chat room there. We'll be checking regularly for questions, so we welcome those. And gentlemen, let's kick this discussion off. Mark, take it away on unsafe driving and crashes.
Sounds good. Thanks, Tom. So I'm going to share my screen here so everybody can see some of the things that we're going to be discussing here. Now, I want to try and be careful and not reveal the motor carriers that are here. That may be it might happen. So I'm going to try and not do that. So anyways, when we talk about our CSA scores, we have 7 basics: unsafe driving, crashes, hours of service, vehicle maintenance, controlled substance, hazardous materials, which most people don't deal with unless you transport hazardous materials, and then driver fitness. Out of those 7 basics, 2 of them are based off what's called the utilization factor. Okay. The utilization factor is a number that is contrived by the number of vehicles reported on your MCS 150 for the number of vehicles and the amount of miles that you have traveled in the last year. And the reason why they do that is if say you have 10 trucks driving 10,000 miles a year, that's 100,000 miles total in a year, and they have 2 crashes. Well, it doesn't seem like a whole lot until you talk about 10 trucks doing 100,000 or 150,000 miles a year, and they have 2 crashes. At that point, they're doing 1 million to 1.5 million miles per year, where this other company is only doing 100,000, and yet they have the same number of crashes. Which company would be worse for unsafe driving or crashes when that happens? Same thing with citations. So that's the reason why they take this utilization factor into consideration. Now, it's very important to keep your MCS 150 up to date. I know you only have to do it once every 2 years, but if we're a growing company and we don't update our MCS 150 when we add trucks to our fleet, then our score for unsafe driving and crashes is going to be artificially high because that utilization factor is probably going to be the worst it can be, right? And they take the number of trucks that's operating out on the road and they come up with this formula to come up with the scores based off of number of qualifying inspections that have unsafe driving violations or based on FMCSA recordable crashes. Now, when it comes to updating our scores, we want to make sure that we have the correct number of vehicle units that we're currently operating, and it's the mileage for the last year. People always think that it's your IFTA mileage. It's the actual mileage of all the vehicles across the fleet that we want to report. And it can actually have a dramatic effect when people do change up their mileage. We can see with this motor carrier, their average number of power units over an 18-month period, and this is part of that utilization factor. 18 months ago, they're showing 98 trucks. 6 months ago, they're 225 trucks. This company is rapidly growing. And now they're currently at 387. A lot of trucks, and they're doing 37 million miles. Amazing. This is a hazardous material company as well. Let's say that they were only doing 20 million miles for some unknown reason. We can actually do a prediction on how that will affect our score when it comes to the utilization factor. If we do not update our MCS 150 and we keep our mileage artificially low, then you can see that our score jumped into the alert and jumped what was that 18 percentage points. Now with the hazmat carrier, the alert levels are 5% lower in each category. So in order for them to stay out of the alert, they got to stay below 60% for unsafe driving. And if they make a mistake updating their MCS 150 by reporting 20 million miles versus what their actual mileage is, you can see that if it takes it at the snapshot date, their score is going to skyrocket and they're going to get an alert. And then once you go into an alert, you have more of a chance of being audited and stopped for roadside inspections. Now, their crash rate is also really low, but just changing the mileage up, you can see that it goes from 7% to 25%, which is a pretty good increase. Now, what's nice about this system that we use, the Central Analysis Bureau, is it takes all the information from FMCSA CSA system. It compiles it all and does the same calculations that FMCSA does, and then comes up with the same scores. There might be a difference of 1 percentage point here or there, but that's very rare because they use the same formulas that FMCSA does. And they update this about a day after FMCSA updates their CSA system. Now, the people that know what CSA is, your insurance underwriters, your insurance producer, they know that when they talk about CSA scores, they're talking, or their cab scores, they're talking about your CSA scores. You are the only one, the motor carrier is the only one that can see your actual CSA scores. Whereas with cab, this is something that's an aftermarket product, and as long as you subscribe to it, you can see all the scores for every company across the US based off of the information that they pull from the FMCSA system. Just know that they're synonymous here. But having the average number of trucks, they take the number of trucks that was listed on the MCS 150 18 months ago, 6 months ago, and the current month. They add them up, divide by 3, and that's your average power units. And then they take that mileage, they put it in a formula, and then you have they come up with that utilization factor. The worst utilization factor you can have is 1. The best you can have is 1.6. And you want that to be the best that it is, but that's all based off of number of trucks and your mileage. So when you get off the webinar today, go ahead and check to see what we have on your MCS 150. If you have more trucks on there, update your MCS 150. It will affect your unsafe driving and your crash score. It won't do it for November because the snapshot date was last Friday, and we're going to get an update on next Monday. But it will affect it for December. Okay. If you're lowering the number of trucks, you only have to update your MCS 150 once every 2 years. Okay. So if you lower it, do you want to show less number of trucks? No. Large companies can change daily the number of trucks that they're operating because they're bringing people on. They might be releasing people. Other people might be going to other companies. If you constantly update every day, that doesn't do anybody any good. That's why they only do it once every 2 years. But if you increase the number of trucks, absolutely update your MCS 150, and you can do that online. And it'll change the next day. Your numbers won't change until the snapshot is, but that's the way that it goes. So I believe Daniel is going to talk about crashes and unsafe driving and how the actual violations and what the crashes will do to your score.
Hey, before we do that,
Okay.
I want to make sure the audience caught that part because we're not going to be in this freight recession forever. And there's a lot of motor carriers probably on the webinar today. They maybe have 5 or 10 trucks. And once the market gets a little bit better, if they've got 7 today, they might want to have 12 by the end of next year. So your point about updating the truck count when you're growing to do it more frequently than the mandatory every 2 years, people need to really hear that point today because, again, a better market, folks are probably going to have a little bit more of a growth mindset. And so keep that MCS 150 updated once you begin to grow again. Daniel, take it away.
Yeah, I'll take it away. Let me share my screen, but Mark.
There, I stopped my share, sir.
Tom, Mark, can you guys see mine?
Yes.
Okay. So to add on to what Mark was saying, that's one way to reduce your guys' unsafe and crashes. There's a few other ways we could assist in that as well and give you guys tips. So every inspection you guys receive, every violation has a point system attached to it. Say, for example, a cell phone violation is 10 points because there's a system from 1 to 10, 10 being more severe of a violation, 1 being less severe. So what we try to do is we try to review you guys' inspections and see what can we help you guys remove based on the actual regulation, which is really important. But also if we can't win that data queue by removing the violation, we're looking to maybe switch that violation. So say, for example, the cell phone is a 10-pointer under 382 right here, using a handheld phone. You got a 10-pointer right here. So we're looking for another violation that carries less points that's going to be able to reduce your score as well. And some of those violations that we're looking for is like a 390.17, which carries 0 points, or inattentive driving, which only carries 5 points. So if you're receiving a cell phone violation, if you received one yesterday, technically that violation's going to carry 30 points because the time waits times 3. But if we get it switched over to a 5-pointer, it's only 15 points. Okay. So when we're looking at these, we have to look at the definition of a cell phone. I'm going to show you guys some examples. Give me a minute. My bad. I pulled it. Give me 1 minute. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay. So, using a handheld mobile telephone, no driver should use a handheld mobile telephone while driving the CMV. No motor carrier shall allow or require its drivers to use a handheld mobile telephone while driving a CMV. So, what's the definition of a handheld mobile telephone? And we're gonna review that as well. Okay. So this is the definition of a handheld mobile telephone. It's using at least one hand to hold the mobile telephone to conduct a voice communication, dialing or answering a mobile telephone by pressing more than a single button, or reaching for a mobile telephone in a manner that requires the driver to maneuver so that he or she is no longer in the seated driving position. Okay. So if we're looking through these inspections and if you guys are looking through your guys' inspection that the drivers are giving you, and we get a violation, the highlighted one is the officer's description says driver has a black cell phone in his right hand looking down at it. Okay, that doesn't meet all the elements under using a handheld mobile device. So what we would do is we would submit a data queue, try to get it removed, and if we can't get it removed, then we might try to get it switched to a violation that carries less points, to maybe like a 390.17 violation. But with this example that I'm showing you right now, there's a citation attached to it, so it's a little bit harder. Usually, whatever state you're submitting this data queue to, they're gonna want proof that it was dismissed. If not, they're not gonna touch it. They're gonna leave it on your record. But this example right here is another example of the handheld violation. So it says driver was observed with a handheld mobile device in hand while driving. Driver said he was looking for next truck stop. So he wasn't making a voice communication. Okay. So it doesn't meet all the elements to the definition of a handheld mobile device. So those are the things we're looking for like an unsafe violation. Another one is, for example, failure to obey a traffic control device. Those are pretty common, but we could also get those changed to a different violation that carries less points. That one, I believe, is 5 points. Yeah, so it's a 5-pointer. There's another violation out there that makes more sense, and it's unlawful parking or leaving a vehicle in the roadway. So what we would do is we would submit the data queue trying to get that violation switched from a 5-pointer to a 1-pointer, and it's going to benefit you in the long run. Okay. So those are some of the things we look for unsafe. But also other recommendations if you guys are looking to reduce your guys' score, is I see it a lot, and a lot of the companies are getting a violation for failure to obey a traffic control device. And it's usually for not stopping at the scales. Okay. I think drivers should pay attention to that. And if the scales are open and you get a red light, go in, because that could quickly add up and put you in an alert status. And the other violation that I see a lot is for speed. Okay. Maybe you guys are getting hit hard in a specific area going through a downgrade. From experience, we used to do enforcement going through mountains and the downgrade and right speed violations. So are you guys getting hit hard in one specific area? Then put that out to the driver so they're aware of where they're doing enforcement. Those are just some tips to help you guys improve your unsafe. We're going to move into the crashes basic. So there's a few things that we review when helping our customers, and it's how do we help them reduce the crash indicator. And Mark told you guys a way that he helps his customers as well. But there's other ways like the crash preventability determination program that FMCSA has out there. And also, are these collisions meeting the definition of an accident? Okay. And I'm going to share what an accident is. And I have some things highlighted that are really important. So when you're involved in an accident, is it a fatality? If it's a fatality, then it's a DOT reportable. Okay. Is there any bodily injury to a person or any results of injury? That keyword immediately receives medical treatment away from the scene of the accident. Okay. That is key, because if you have an ambulance that goes out to the scene, just looks at you and doesn't transport you, you're okay, but then you say you're injured, technically under the definition of an accident, he didn't get immediate treatment away from the scene. Other one is one or more vehicles incurring disabling damage as a result of the accident, requiring the motor carrier to be transported away from the scene by a tow truck. Okay. If the vehicle goes into the median, stuck in the median, no damage, calls a tow truck to tow it out of there, and then takes off driving, doesn't meet the definition. So we need to be reading the police report, making sure that it actually meets all the requirements of an accident. If it does, then we could look at the crash preventability determination program that FNCSA has in place. It gives 16 examples that you could potentially look for and submit to get those points removed. Some of them are like struck in rear, if you get rear-ended and you believe it fits, you submit it, points will be removed. There's 16 examples, like I said. Just make sure it fits, because if not, they're going to get denied. Now, by submitting these data cues for the crash preventability, does it make a difference on your score? I could tell you it does, and I'm going to show you an example. So this is a company that had some accidents, some DOT reportables, and I took just 2 accidents away by submitting the crash preventability under the crash preventability, and their score dropped to 25. Okay, so review your accident report, make sure it falls under the definition. If it does, review the crash preventability examples and submit your data cues.
Mark and Daniel, let me ask a question or two, and just I want to also remind the audience that in the chat space down at the bottom of the webinar page, you can submit questions that we'll be getting to. But as you deal with motor carriers, how often are they aware that these types of violations can be challenged through data cues? I know a lot of your time, both of you, is spent on that, and it would seem like a lot of folks figure once an inspection is done or an accident has occurred, there's nothing they can do. But you're telling us you can make a difference. Just talk a little bit about the knowledge level, and that obviously that's why you're here to help.
I mean, from my experience, there's a lot of companies that don't even have a data queue access, like they don't have access to the data queue page, so they're not submitting any data queue. They aren't aware that they could do this. And I think that's the biggest thing I see when I'm talking to customers. They're like, "Oh, we didn't know we could do that." Like they take it as once the officer hands them the inspection, hey, that's all we could do.
Yeah.
Mark, how about you? Any different perspective, even though it might dovetail a little bit?
Yeah, see, the interesting thing here is Daniel works in the southwest United States. I work out of Chicago, Milwaukee area. So a lot of the motor carriers in this area, they understand that there's a data queue system out there, right? But they're not real versed in how they should word things and the route they should take. And they should be specific on what they can do. Now, if they do know about the data queues, they're usually not very successful when they do them, or they may not have access to them. They may not know that other people, such as Daniel and I, can do a data queue for you with our own login information, because anybody can do a data queue for any inspection report that is out there. Talking about, trying to get things changed around. So, yeah, definitely different, I think, throughout the US. And I think it also is a major factor of how new the company is. Company that's been around for 20 years, they understand the data queue system, but a new company that's a couple years old, they may have heard about it, but have no clue of what to do.
Well, and we talked in the beginning and we see the list of the 7 categories, the so-called basics. And today's focus, of course, is unsafe driving, crashes, and vehicle maintenance. But one thing you've shared with me, Mark, is that of these 7 categories, 6 of them are compiled, what, solely out of inspection reports?
That is correct. So once those numbers are generated, 6 out of the 7, unsafe driving, hours of service, vehicle maintenance, controlled substance, hazmat, and driver fitness. Those are all on roadside inspection reports. If your driver gets a ticket for speeding, there's no inspection report, it's not going to affect your CSA score. Now, when it comes to crashes, any officer, law enforcement officer across the US that can write a crash for an automobile can write a crash for a commercial motor vehicle. And all they have to do is check one of those 3 boxes of somebody was transported away from the scene by an ambulance, there was a disabling damage to a vehicle, or that there was a fatality. You would think you couldn't get out of a fatality, but officers make mistakes and they check the box for for a fatal crash. The company, client of mine found that and they did the data queue themselves and they were able to get that removed, which is awesome. Um, but they don't understand what disabling damage is, because there's a definition of what disabling damage is. You could have a flat tire, not even have a tire in your vehicle, and that's not disabling damage if that's the only thing that's there. And what Daniel was talking about before, if your vehicle runs off the road, hits a roadway sign, the trooper comes, writes the crash report, leaves before the tow gets there, and they just put down that they called the tow. Well, is they put it down as disabling damage, and we can show that we drove the vehicle away from the scene, or they towed it back to the company and we immediately drove it away from the company after we paid for the tow. That is not disabling damage, and we can do those data queues for if it's an FMCSA recordable crash. Now, if we win those, the crash comes off of your profile completely, goes away. If we went through the crash preventability determination program, it'll stay on the profile, but the point value will no longer affect their CSA scores. It'll on your on the CSA SMS system, it'll say non-preventable, which means there's literally nothing our driver could have done to prevent it. The thing to know here is if it is not in the crash preventability eligibility guide, you can't do it through that program. And they will check on that every time you do a data queue through it. If it doesn't fit one of those scenarios, they automatically decline it and through the pre-screening program. And then about 90 days later, then they'll come up with a decision, because they're more than 90 days behind on those crash preventability
Hey,
determination programs.
Mark, can you see my screen?
I
Where
can't.
it says not, you
Yep.
can?
Yep.
Right here, this is what Mark is talking about, the non-preventable. It's still on there, but that's what it's gonna say.
Yep. And so
Well,
those point values no longer affect the company. It's kind of the same as not being on your profile. Why they don't remove it completely, I don't know. But they get that designation and it doesn't affect. So it's basically the same thing when it comes to your CSA scores.
So, and then another thing I want to add, Tom, to if you're going to be submitting these crash preventability, under that, you need the police report, you're going to need the medical card, and if it's a fatal, that you're going to need the post-accident drug test to be able to submit them.
That's great. Well, and the other thing too is, Reliance has the largest market share of motor carriers under 50 or fewer trucks in the United States. In your experience, are fleets providing are providing enough time to adequately look over these inspection reports? I mean, they're just in the busyness of the day. It feels to me like there can sometimes be a gold mine of information that can be challenged if they're taking the time to look at the inspection reports. What's been the experience of both of you?
I'll start with, so one of our larger clients, I was introduced to them about a month ago. And a month and a half prior to that, I had contacted them via email talking about their CSA scores. And I told them, like, there's 13 crashes here in the last year, and none of them have a non-preventable tag on there. So I'd like to take a look at those if you don't mind to see if there's anything there. And their response from their safety person was, oh, we reviewed all of them. Um, there's nothing there. Well, a month and a half later, we got on a Zoom call um, with some of the ownership, and we were talking about the same thing because I think it's imperative for people to know it's always better to have another set of eyes on there. So they agreed to send me their crash reports, found 3 out of the 13 that could be done on the crash preventability side. They're submitted and they're waiting to be adjudicated through FMCSA through the data queue system. And if they win them, they're going to come out of the alert, which they shouldn't have been in because these crashes are more than 6 months old. If they would have data queued them as soon as they got the crash reports, they would have never been in the crash alert at all. And that's just, people see different things or they may overlook some things, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we all have our jobs to do, and our job, mine and Daniel's, to help motor carriers out with their safety. We've done this with a combined experience of what, 35 years. We've done a lot. So we have a little bit different perspective as well. We know how how officers can make mistakes. I've seen it quite a bit there in my career. And when I was a trainer, I was a field training officer as well, you would correct them in the middle of their enforcement and say, "Yeah, we can't do that."
Yeah.
You
We're,
know,
we're, we're human at the end of the day. We all make a mistake. It happened to me when I was on patrol as well. But to go back on Tom's question, I mean, with the companies I deal with, I see that larger companies, since they have a safety person, they might be able to catch some of these things. But I think when you're talking about like the smaller companies like 50 and under, it might be a little bit hard because the owner might be running safety, might be running the company, might be running.
He
He
might
has,
be dispatching loads
yeah, he
or
you know what I'm
trucks
saying?
and booking loads.
And they might miss these things, and that's what Mark is saying. Having another set of eyes is definitely going to help out.
We have a question here, and I just want to acknowledge that question. Let's go to the next section first on vehicle maintenance, and then we'll come back with the discussion, including answering this individual's question. Mark, I think you were going to tackle vehicle maintenance.
Yes, sir. All right. I'm going to share my screen here on a couple, well, just on one carrier. This is a current client of ours. Let me share my screen. And I'm going to share a couple of screens after a little bit here. So on my screen here in the cab system, we can see historical CSA scores over the last year, and we can even go back further in a different system. But here we can actually see what the measure is, what group that they were in, and what their actual score was, and whether or not it was in the alert. With this motor carrier, I've done several safety meetings with them. I in person, do walk around inspections. I preach BLT checks. Good pre-trip, good post-trip, But every time our driver gets out of the vehicle and before they get back in again, brakes, lights, and tires. They're the number one violations for any larger motor carrier for vehicle maintenance. They may be lights, tires, and brakes, could be tires, brakes, lights, could be brakes, lights, then tires. Those are always the top three CSA point getters for any company that has an issue with vehicle maintenance. Now, anyone that is familiar, and there might be some on here, this is an intermodal carrier. They're exclusively hauling intermodal chassis, and most of them are not their own. When we first started working with them, they were unaware that they could do a data queue for any violation that a driver could not have seen during a pre-trip inspection, including no annual inspection on the trailers, on the intermodal chassis. Well, we were able to do, a few data queues, and then with the training, their score has gone from, you can see, as a high of 85 and has just dropped off the cliff, and we're now sitting at a 53%. This motor carrier works at a huge rail hub out of Chicago. They get a lot of inspections, and usually with intermodals, those intermodal chassis are usually not the best, right? They usually get a lot of lighting violation, a lot of tire issues, a lot of brake issues. Well, this company is doing such a good job. They are listening and they're holding their drivers accountable for their pre-trip, post-trip, and inter-trip inspections, that their CSA scores have plummeted for an intermodal carrier. And in this area of the US, it's almost unheard of. So it is very good training, data queues, reviewing of inspections. Those are key issues when it comes to vehicle maintenance. Now, just as we've been talking before, when it comes to any of the CSA scores, it comes down to roadside inspections. Now, every roadside inspection is going to have a level 3 component, which is your CDLs, hours of service, medical certificates, right? And then a level 2, which is your walk around inspection, includes a level 3. And then a level 1 includes the level 2. They go underneath the vehicle and they check the brake systems, and it also includes a level 3. So the most stringent inspection for the purposes here is going to be the level 1. If there are any radiological haulers, the class 7 hazmat, you will know who you are. Level 6 is actually the most stringent. Their point of origin, zero defect for hauling transuranic waste and highway route control quantities of this stuff. But I digress here a little bit. I'm going to share another screen of inspection reports that I have reviewed lately that we have won data queues on. Now, when it comes to vehicle maintenance, people would think, if a light's out, it's out. Well, if lights are required and it's out, yeah, that's a violation. But officers make mistakes all the time. They could list, everything on an inspection report has a thing. So when we're looking at this inspection report and we can see the violation section here, the violation coding, this is what the CSA system uses to assign points. If the officer doesn't pick the correct code, we could get the wrong point value here. So other things that we look at, make sure it's the right code. If they pick a code with less points, we don't want to data queue that, unless they are absolutely wrong. Because if they say, hey, a basic light is out, and they say, and then their notes, they put down a tail light is out, tail light is 6 point, a basic light is 2. We'd rather have that 2-pointer versus a 6-pointer. So we don't want to point that out. When officers make a mistake in our favor, we don't want to point it out to them. But when an officer is making a mistake and they shouldn't have done it, like on this inspection report, when you first look at it, we can see that this is going to be a level 1 because there are brake push rod movements. That means that officer went underneath the vehicle. Well, what most people don't really understand is where it says chamber up here, this is telling you what type of brake is on that axle end. It is very rare to have a normal type 30 chamber, which is a C30 is a normal clamp type 30. Their max push rod can only be at 2 inches. It is not normal to have a long stroke brake chamber and the next for a drive axle, and the next drive axle has a normal stroke. So I called the motor carrier and I'm like, can you have the driver take a picture of the back axle's brakes? They took it on the phone, and on the back of it, in order to identify what a long stroke is, because they get a ½ inch more movement because of the chamber size, it has a trapezoidal tag that says 3 inches. That's a type 30 chamber. We were able to take that photo, do a data queue to have this violation for the clamp or rotor type brake out of adjustment removed for the axle 3 left and right. Those are 4-point violations. Once you have a brake out of adjustment, there's automatically another violation that gets placed on the inspection report if the vehicle is manufactured after 1994. And if you're driving a vehicle pre-1994, you know a lot about vehicle maintenance. So you get a violation for an automatic slack adjuster is no longer compensating for wear. That's another 4-point violation. And then, since there were 3 brakes in there with issues, you get another violation in there that says the 20% of the brake system is defective. It's an out of service violation, and it's another 2 points. We were able to remove, and there's another issue, I'm going to point this out in a second. We were able to remove the clamp rotor type out of adjustment, 4 points. It's not 4 points, it's time weighted. Multiply that by 3 for the first 6 months. So 4 points, the automatic slack adjuster because they weren't out of adjustment. There's another 4, so that's 8. We got the brakes out of service because only 1 brake was having an issue now for the first violation and not 3. So that is 10% of the brakes instead of 20%. So they were able to remove that out of service, which is an additional 2. So 10 points, multiply that by 3, 30 points that they were able to remove just because we got a picture of the brake system and knowing that it is very rare for a long stroke to be on one drive axle, but not on the second drive axle. That is extremely rare. I don't remember ever seeing it actually. Now going from the steer tires, yeah, steers can be long stroke, they can be short stroke, and the drives will be different. That's fine. Trailers, it would be rare for them to be one long stroke and the other axle end to not be long stroke, to be a normal stroke. So we were able to remove 3 violations on there for 1 issue, and that was the brakes being out of adjustment. The top violation, brake leak from air chamber, axle 1 right brake chamber, air leak upon braking application. Well, and it's listed as being out of service, which means it's got to be fixed before the vehicle can move. Well, by the time I see these inspections, they've already got the issue fixed because you got to get them fixed right away. But the only way something can be listed as out of service, if it is listed in the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance's out of service criteria that's published on April 1st. It's funny, April 1st, April Fool's Day, every year. And they update it every year. If it's not listed in there, then it's not out of service. This violation is listed, but it's listed in such a way that you would think that it's normally out of service. But just like a brake being out of adjustment, it's only out of service if it equals 20%. And with the CVSA operational policies that are in place, they don't put individual brakes out of service unless it meets a different part of the out of service criteria. So we were able to successfully data queue this one as well and remove the out of service violation. So which is another 2 points. So 12 total points, 36 with time weight, and this is no longer an out of service inspection. If it's not an out of service inspection, then our out of service rate goes down for our vehicle maintenance. With that out of service on there, it goes up. Much rather have it off and have our out of service rate go down.
Hey,
That's-
Mark or
Yes.
Daniel, anytime a motor carrier gets a violation with the maximum points of 10, do you recommend either you guys or someone on their team automatically take a look to see if there's a lesser category that can be moved into?
I mean, I would recommend looking at every violation. But yeah, if you notice that that violation is going to carry 10 points, then maybe take an extra look at it and see if it could be reduced or removed.
We've got a question from our audience that I know others are thinking about. What should someone do after a not at fault accident to avoid future impacts on their business's safety scores? Who wants to grab that one first?
So what I recommend is it's not at fault, right? But you got to review it. Have a committee at your company to review the crash, to make sure that our driver was doing everything that they could have done. If there is something else our driver could have done, no matter what it was, and we can put some of those practices in place. Say if they're operating in the right lane of a multiple lane highway, and then they move over to the left to make that right turn. Well, when they move to the left, did they move all the way into the lane, allowing traffic on the right to start to pass? Even if they got their directional on, because we know drivers of automobiles can be a little crazy. Um, and drivers try to pass. That happens all the time. So what is something our driver could do? Move only halfway. Don't allow them that space, that full space to come out. I teach my kids all the time. I taught three of my girls and my fiance's kid taught her youngest, how to drive to get their driver's license. And the things I always talk about, speed and space management. The more space you have from other vehicles, the better you will be. The less speed that you will have when you're in a crash, the less energy is going to be involved in a crash. Reduction of fatalities, reduction of injuries, reduction of the damage that's involved in there. And it will increase the driver's time to react to things that are happening around them just by having a little bit of reduction in speed. That is huge.
Um, just a reminder for the audience, I think I said incorrectly earlier, questions could be submitted through the chat portion, but it's actually through the Q&A portion down at the bottom of the webinar screen.
Hey, Tom, I was reading that question again, and we're talking about fatality crashes.
Oh, okay.
Okay. A fatality crash is automatically going to show up on your profile. The only way to get it off, the only way is if it fits into the crash preventability determination program's eligibility guide. Okay. And then even if it does, this is important, even if it fits into that guide, let's say we're sitting at a traffic light and a drunk driver runs into the back of our vehicle and it's a fatality. If we don't do drug and alcohol testing or record the reasons why we couldn't get it done, which is the requirement if we can't get it done within the time frames, we're automatically going to lose that data queue and it stays on the record. If our driver vehicle is out of service, so if it gets a post-crash inspection and the driver is over hours or the brakes are out of adjustment, it's written into the law that if there is an out of service issue present at the time of the crash, it can also not be removed. Now, this is information that they don't put in the eligibility guide, but it is in the regulation that created the crash preventability determination program. So very, very important. Every fatality, alcohol testing at 2 hours, or we got to write down the reason why it wasn't done. 8 hours, or we got to write down the reasons why it wasn't done. And then for drugs, it's 32 hours, or we got to write down the reasons why it wasn't done. And there could be a multitude of things. Our driver could be hurt as well, and they're automatic, and they're in the hospital. We don't have contact with them. These things happen. One nice thing is usually in a fatality, officers will ask the driver to go with them to get a drug and alcohol test. We can use the officer's test for this to satisfy that requirement. We just got to get a copy of it.
And something to add to that about like I would say 90%, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but about 90% of the time you're involved in a fatal collision, I would say there's going to be a state trooper, someone that's certified to go out there and do a post-collision inspection on that vehicle. I've seen it minimal times where maybe it happens in a small town or city that they don't call out a state trooper that's certified to inspect that vehicle, but 90% of the time you should be getting a post-collision inspection and you should be getting the report as well.
We had
I
another
agree.
question come in. Is there a limit to the number of CSA points an officer can give a driver or motor carrier at a roadside inspection?
All right, so I'll answer that one real quick. Officers, roadside officers have no clue about the CSA system. They don't know what the points are. They don't know how it affects a motor carrier. They have no idea how the system works. I didn't know how it worked until I came over to Reliance, and another person who was working safety was showing me this stuff. And then I read the manual and I'm like, oh my God, it has a devastating effect. The maximum number of points for any one inspection is 30 points. 30 total points. Now, I believe that's across all the different basic categories, but you get 30 points, that's 90. That's 90 coming onto your profile. And what's really nice about our system here, I'm gonna share my screen here real quick.
And why is it that an officer would not know that? Maybe while you're looking for that, Mark,
30.
Daniel can weigh in.
We're not trained when we go through these trainings that the FMCSA at the time, now CBSA is doing them. We're trained to find the violations. We're not trained how it affects the company.
Okay.
Absolutely true. I was going to say that exact same thing. So what's nice about the central analysis system, let's say you get a really bad inspection that has 30 total points that are going to come on board for your vehicle maintenance. Well, we can do some predictive analysis for your company and say, well, take that 30, multiply it by 3, 90 points are going to come on. Well, if they don't show up tomorrow, they show up after the snapshot and the publishing date. So we go forward 1 month, and this is going to be your point total for vehicle maintenance next month. Add 90 points to that. We go up to 218. We're sitting in between 75 and 80% at that point value. You get another inspection with a 4-point breakout of adjustment violation, which drivers are not able to detect. And that company is going into the alert. And we can do some predictive analysis on that. And we also have some strategies on how to get good inspections with good trucks, which will actually lower scores for most of the basic categories, except for crashes and unsafe driving. They have no effect on those.
Couple other things. For the motor carriers in our audience today, Reliance, our IT department, has worked with CAB to create basically a relatively straightforward report. I think it's a maximum of 4 pages. So if you're looking to get that kind of a concise analysis of your record, talk to your Reliance agent or producer. It's something that we feel really strongly about, and some of our best success stories in the company are happening because these folks are regularly getting that CAB report. Mark, you also mentioned Chicago Intermodal and that, because this is our Phoenix office hosting this. We know a lot of the same circumstances will be similar because of LA and Long Beach, Oakland, all of the various West Coast ports there. So, yeah, let me go back. You mentioned, in a dray situation, so many of the chassis, their chassis pools, leases, all these different things that are out there. So were you saying earlier that if a driver goes and they're picking up a chassis, it's not their fault if there's some sort of violation on it? How does that play out a little bit?
All right. So there are about 10 years ago, they changed up on how violations are associated with intermodal chassis, because most of those chassis are coming off of trains, they're coming off of ships and whatnot, you may never see that chassis again in your career, right? And so so once you take that chassis and give it away, you'll never see it again. And the company may not see it for years as well, because it's going all over the US. So in order to hold the person who owns it accountable for it, they say that anything that can't be identified on a walk around inspection, pre-trip by the driver, should affect the intermodal provider, and the violation gets associated to the intermodal provider and not to the motor carrier that's transporting it. So tail lights, marker lights, ABS lights, the connection, the twist connections to secure the corners of the intermodal chassis. Those all go to the motor carrier. Tires, those go to the motor carrier. But a brake being out of adjustment, brake hoses being worn, a clevis pin that's missing for the pivot pin going from the slack adjuster to the push rod, all of those violations go to the intermodal provider. Okay, so they won't affect, they're not supposed to affect. Now, officers don't always attribute that to the intermodal provider. Why? Officers get lazy. I can tell you, I was one of them. When they changed that, I'm like, I'm not going through these extra steps. So I just wouldn't identify the intermodal chassis as an intermodal chassis. I'd put it down as a trailer. When you do that, all violations go to the motor carrier. Why? No clue how the CSA system works and the point values. I knew that they were out there, but I had no idea how it affected a motor carrier and how devastating it can be if it's not done correctly. It's kind of the same way with post-crash inspections as well. Anything that's listed, any violations that's listed as occurring because of the crash, and it'll say they'll have a crash column, it'll have a Y or an N. If it says it has a Y in it, then those violations will not count towards your CSA profile. But if the officer does something wrong and puts N for everything, and they had major front end damage, so they write up the hood, the lights, and the tires, and the axles being displaced, and they don't list anything as being caused by the crash, then we can data queue that and say, hey, this was obviously caused by the crash. Here are the photos for it. Can we get the inspection report amended to show caused by the crash, which will have a major effect on how much CSA points that is it attributed for that one inspection.
And usually, just to add a little bit on that, usually when they're carrying that chassis, the officer, they won't let them complete the report if that information isn't complete as well. So pop something up. Hey, you need to fill this information, and that's when Mark was saying that they'll just put trailer and move on.
Hey, humans are humans. People get lazy.
So,
Well, or you just get so busy at times as well. So there's a question. Help me find the formula to calculate the ISS score.
Yeah, good luck on that. They don't publish it.
Okay.
They don't. I've looked for that. I've never seen it.
Well,
It's an algorithm, so I
let's
don't
go
know.
back to something you said earlier, and I want to let our audience know we're probably in the last 5 minutes here, just to respect people's time. But you talked about utilization factors and scores there. 1.6 is the best, one is the worst. Can you give us a quick sample on how that's calculated? How it might be at 1.6 or somewhere in between?
Sure. So for combination motor vehicles, so that's most of us that are on there. If you're a straight truck company, that's completely different. So don't listen if you're a truck company. So a huge effect on your CSA scores for crashes and unsafe driving is the average power units over 18 months. And then they take that and then they come up with the utilization factor as well, which also affects it. So let's say your average power unit count over 18 months is 100. Well, the best mileage you could have to get that one, to stay away from one, it can't be the average miles per vehicle can't be 80,000 or less, or 200,000 or more per truck per year. So if you have 100 trucks and you're at 21 million miles, that's over 200,000 trucks. You're gonna have a utilization factor of 1. But if you're 199,000 miles, you're going to have a utilization factor of 1.6. So once you hit about 160,000 miles per truck per year, and that's the average power units, not the current power units, the average over 18 months, from 160,000 miles up to 199,999, it's at 1.6. And when you fill out that MCS 150, it asks you to enter your mileage to the nearest 10,000 miles, okay, for the last year. Remember, it's not IFTA, it's the actual number of miles. Kind of like when you come in and get an audit, they want the number of miles across all vehicles because what they're doing at that point is they're going to check your crash rate using the mileage over the last year.
We had a couple more questions, but I think you answered it. It was all still tied to the ISS score. So, all right. So, if folks want to get in contact with you, what's your email? Each of you. Daniel, start with you.
It's daniel.vega@reliancepartners.com, and I'll go ahead and put it in the chat before
Yeah, why don't you
we
put
finish
Mark's in
this.
there, but Mark, go ahead and give it verbally as well while he's typing.
Mine is mark.barler@reliancepartners.com. If you don't get that information or you forget it, the person that invited you on today, contact them and then they can get you in contact with us. And hopefully we can start working together to earn your insurance where you become a client, and then we can start helping you out with safety as well. And I'll throw mine in the chat.
Yeah, these guys are here to help. That's why we're doing this webinar today. Today's material is really just one small component of all their different capabilities. Mark, you mentioned earlier you were doing an on-site meeting at a customer. Can you tell us just a little bit about that? What was the original purpose of that meeting? You shared a story of something you learned out of it, but why did the client invite you on site?
So they were having their annual driver meeting,
Okay,
and being, it's kind of like your kids. They don't listen to you all the time, and then you worry about them when they go out in the public and they get around other people, and you're like, oh my God, they're angels. What's going on?
right.
When you're not around. Kind of the same way with drivers. You listen to your boss all the time. You're like, I've heard that before. But you get former law enforcement coming in, it kind of carries a little bit more weight when it comes to it. And if you can explain to the driver why things are the way that they are, this is what the officer is looking for. This is where you're going to get into have the most issues with. I always look at the back of semi tractors, and you got your white retroreflective sheeting in the upper corners on the back of your tractor. Well, in my area of the country, you get the hard plastic ones. They don't tell you that they're going to fall off in about 2 years from all the cold and, the salt and the spray that's going on. So I tell them straight up, take that white retroreflective tape and outline the hard white reflectors, because those white reflectors are going to fall off. That white retroreflective sheeting is going to stay there until you sell the truck or it burns off somehow. They always stay there. So those are just little things that little nuances you can tell the company and the drivers, and you show them, and they start looking in the back of your tractor. Oh my God, I got that there. Oh my God, I'm missing that reflector, or I'm missing lights here. That's the wrong color. Is that the wrong height?
All right, we're going to begin to wrap it up here. I'm going to summarize a few takeaways that I heard. Also, we recorded this today, so if you want to hear it again, reach out to your Reliance agent, or someone on your team needs to hear it. We welcome that opportunity, but just a handful of takeaways. The MCS 150 report needs to be filed, updated every 2 years. But if you're in a growth mode, again, think about an eventual recovery. You're going to want to update that more. So point number one. Secondly, whether it's trip inspections, your overall CSA scores, are really just about anything related to safety, regulations, and compliance, our team is here to help. A second set of eyes is absolutely invaluable. Number three, if you're still not sure what to look at after a vehicle inspection, or a maintenance inspection, start with scores of 10. See if there's other categories that can be moved around. And if you're not sure, Daniel and Mark can help you right there. A fourth takeaway was brakes, lights, and tires. The most common violations under the vehicle maintenance category within the CSA scores. You pre-trip, post-trip, in between trips. So when you're taking that bathroom break, take a look. And then lastly, those the abbreviated cab reports that our IT department has worked to create are available for you as a motor carrier. Ask your producers about that. We're happy to share that information. Thanks everyone for being with us today. Mark and Daniel, it's always enjoyable for me to listen to what you're doing in the field. Thanks to our audience and the Phoenix team for being involved, and happy Halloween as well. Go out and get some good candy tonight. Take care, everyone.
Take care.
But